What's up, everyone? Today I am going to show you how to tear apart the KastKing WhiteMax Baitcaster. Everybody's been asking me how I get them to run so smooth. Well, I'm going to show people by tearing this one all the way down. The red tape you see in there is nothing more than holding my line out of the way, so when I take the spool out, it won't come unraveled on me because it's got a good handful of fluorocarbon on the end of it. And as you all know, fluorocarbon is not fun when it comes to keeping a set. It wants to pop open when it comes out, so that's why we do that. Okay, the tools you're going to need are a 10mm socket that I just put on a ratcheting screwdriver. Makes it a lot easier. A small Phillips screwdriver, a big screwdriver head, which also fits that tool. I always have a small screwdriver tip, standard blade for popping plugs like the ones on the ends of the reel handles, if they're the ones that pop out and aren't the ones that actually screw out. And then a pair of pliers. I prefer the ones that are needle nose somewhat and a little bent because I can see what I'm doing then. And these ones have no jaws on them. They don't have the cuts in the jaws, so they are very smooth and don't tend to mar things up as much. Don't really need them very often, but sometimes for little springs and stuff they are nice. And in case you would need them for something that you're going to touch that could mar, I just prefer to not have something that's going to mar. That's just how I like to do it, period. That's just how I do it. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to do your standard pop off your side cover. Okay, once your side cover comes off, if I can get the side cover off. Okay, side cover comes off. You're going to have a bearing in the top of that. Okay, little bearing in the top of that, as you can see, little bearing in there. Okay, put that down. Then your spool comes out. Okay, simple enough. This side has a little Phillips screw that holds a ring that's grooved that holds that nut in place so it can't back off on you. So you can take your Phillips screwdriver and you're going to take that out now. Take that out. That little screw comes out. Dump it over and that piece comes out right there. Okay. Take your 10mm socket, and this is where it gets a little tricky sometimes. A lot of these threads on these reels are going to be left-handed threads, so that it actually wants to tighten as you're reeling instead of wanting to loosen up, even though you've got the lock screw in there and everything. So KastKing happens to be a left-handed thread, so you're going to want to tighten as you normally would be tightening a bolt. The righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, it's the exact opposite. So you're going to want to be tightening this to unloosen it. So we're going to tighten it, and that'll actually unloosen it. That nut comes off, then the handle comes off. After the handle comes off, you're going to have a little half-moon washer in here. There's that little half-moon washer. All that washer does is gives it a little tension. Keeps a little tension on that handle. Keeps pressure on it. Then, once again, you're going to have the reverse threads on your drag system. So you're going to be tightening it to get that to come off. Okay. Now that's off. Now you're going to have this whole section here comes out. Okay. What this section involves is at the very top you're going to have two half moon washers. Okay, there's two of them there, and you can see they're concaved. They are concaved. Okay, the concave part faces downward, and they just fit into each other like that. Those go first. They sit on top of the clicker, your little clicker there, which gives you your tension and zip as you're spinning your drag and holds the drag in place. And then 2 flat washers, just plain round flat washers, are going to be on the bottom. Okay, now that's done. Sometimes you can bump it on the ground like that and the bearing will come out. The top bearing, there's your first sealed bearing right there. That's your top bearing for your crank handle. Okay, now I like to take the cap off, your tension knob for your spool. Take that tension knob off, get that out of the way. Okay, now we're going to go to our smaller screwdriver, which I set somewhere. There it is. And you're going to have 4 screws that hold this case together. There's going to be 2 on the outside face right there. As you can see, 2 on the outside face. Okay, right there. And then you're going to have 2 on the inside face. One's going to be inside right where the spindle goes, right where your spool goes, and one's going to be on the outside right at the front where your very first guide, your reel guide, is. So we're going to take those 4 screws out right now. Okay, gonna pull those 4 screws out. Very simple stuff, guys, very simple stuff. Nothing hard. Now, on some reels, this is KastKing, so KastKing keeps all the screws the same length. Some reels will have different length screws inside of these things, so you're going to want to make sure you keep track of where those screws go, because the different lengths, it will matter. You don't want to have too long of one end where usually it's the one where the spool goes that will have the shorter one. Sometimes there's like 5 screws that will hold the reel together, and you'll have one way out here on the outer surface somewhere, like out here, and that one's going to be the shorter one. It just depends, but either way, just know your reel and pay attention. And you can always take pictures, guys. Take pictures of these things as you take them apart. You know, use your camera. Phones have cameras, and I'll show you guys these on this other camera. That they are all the exact same size. There you go. All same exact size. I like when companies do that, so you don't have to worry about it. But it isn't that big of a deal if they don't. Just pay attention to where they came out, take pictures. You know, like I said, use your camera to your advantage. Now, the top part of your reel will pop right out. Okay? Pops right out. Nothing to it. Nothing to it. Pops right out. Okay? Okay. So the next step is the anti-reverse bearing. Okay. Now what you want to make sure on the anti-reverse bearing is that you get it in the right direction. Okay? As you're reeling this reel, you want the thing to freewheel backwards. Okay? It needs to freewheel as you're cranking backwards, and turn the gears as you're going forward, obviously. So you got to note that, because if you put that in upside down, it's going to do the exact opposite. It's not going to want to crank when you go forward. It's going to lock, because that's what the anti-lock, that's what the anti-reverse bearing does. And what the anti-reverse bearing has, if you can see in there, there are those little bearings in there with a little slot. Okay, that has that little slot in there. You can see those bearings in there a little bit. What that slot does is it has a groove that gets wider and skinnier. Goes wider and skinnier. So as that bearing rolls the wrong way, it goes into that tight groove and locks that onto this little shaft, which is keyed to your crankshaft. Okay, it's got that little, you can see that it's keyed there, has that oval shape to be keyed. You can see that it's oval shape there. Okay, that's what locks it on to the shaft. So you have to be very careful in putting this bearing in the right way. Now KastKing's bearing are actually tapered. You can see that little taper on the top right there. There's a little taper. Okay, that taper faces up when it's looking at the big ring gear at the bottom. So that taper is going to be up at the top, okay? So you got your big ring gear and all your drag discs. That taper right there, that little shoulder that you see, that taper is going to face up on KastKing. Don't know about other brands, just know that's what KastKing does. Okay, now I like to pull the whole entire clutch assembly out as one. Okay, so you got all your clutches and your stills inside here. Your drag system all comes out as one assembly, and you can see it's keyed as well, just like other things are. They got the keyway to meet to lock up into the handle. Okay. Then you're going to have one little disc that sometimes will stick on, sometimes it won't, that'll stay down here. That's the very first fiber disc in your drag system. Okay, so put that one down there. Okay, and then you have this little gear. That little gear right there is what you're popping. That stops the spindle from free spinning when you're locked in. So when you push the button to cast, you're unlocking this to let the spool free spool in both directions. And that's this gear's, that's this little lever right here that locks into that. And as you can see, when you push the button, how that locks, and I did that. Yeah. Okay, how that locks into that. You can see how that locks into that. See how that locks into that? So you got to make sure that goes in properly so that that will lock into that top piece right there. And then when you hit the button, or when you crank to pop it out, it lets it free spool so that you can crank. So that is how that's all together. So you're going to pull that out. Now I had this all pop out on me ahead of time, but because of pushing that button before I pulled that section out. So I will put that all back together so you guys can see how that goes. So you're going to want to take a picture of that and know how that gear went in. 90% of the time, the teeth are going to be going in the counterclockwise direction. I know that's how most of the KastKings are. But no matter what, it's always going to have the teeth facing towards that little mechanism right there at the top that your button pushes. So the teeth have to face towards that. As long as you have your teeth facing towards that mechanism at the top that the trigger controls, your button controls, you're going to be fine. Now we have your pinion. This is the pinion section. Okay, the pinion section involves two springs. Okay, two little springs. Those two little springs. So we're going to pull those springs off first. Okay. Don't lose those springs. The reel will not work without those. Okay. Those pins sit on those little pins right there. You can see those little pins right there that they sit on. Okay. Then when that's done, you can pull the pinion and its guide right out like that. Just take that thing and pull it right off those pins. So I'll do it one more time up here on this camera. It's sitting in there like that. Just grab it and just pull it right off those pins as an assembly. Okay. Now, the important thing to remember with this is the gears. That's all gear. Okay. It's all gear. Goes to the top. Okay. The one that has the grooves in it. Those grooves at the bottom there, as you can see right there, those little grooves. There's the real good one right there, that groove right there. That groove right there is what locks into your spindle. So that has to obviously go down and face the spindle. Now, the way it goes into its slider block right here is the gear that's all gear, not the one with the grooves in it, but the part that's all gear has to face up. And it goes into it just like that. Just slides into it just like that. And the way you can tell that this plastic piece goes in is two things. One, the easiest is the holes on the bottom do not have any seat for the springs, where the top have a shoulder that's bigger diameter so the springs will fit in it. So if you look at that, you have a small diameter and you have a big diameter, okay? So the big diameter faces up, the part that's all gear faces up, okay? That's how you know how that goes in. And also, the second way you can tell is the bottom part has these little this little slant to it. It's hard to tell on that camera, but this one might show you. See that slant right there? You can see that little slant. That slant is what touches the two slants on this part that the button pushes and rotates. When you hit that button, that rotates that. Well, as that thing rotates, that slant goes up these two ramps, and that pushes that up and down, which locks or unlocks the spool and lets it free throw too. Okay, so that's as far apart as you need to take this section over here. You don't need to take any of this stuff apart any further unless something's broke. There's no reason to, because there's no bearings in there or anything, so you're just going to drop a little bit of Lucas lube down in there. You're going to want to get all the old grease out first. That's the main thing. Get all that old thick grease. They use a thicker grease in these things. Don't know why. That's what all real manufacturers do. They use a heavier grease in these. So get all the grease out of all out of everything. Anything that's got grease in it, get that grease out of it. You're going to use a white lithium grease. It's thinner, but it's still waterproof. And it just works wonders inside these reels. And you're going to get that all out of there. Now, this area that spins around that plastic as you push that button, when you push your button and you see that thing sliding back and forth right there, okay, you can see that sliding right there. That area around that plastic, all that area right in there, you're going to put some drops of Lucas reel oil. You can use any reel oil you want, but I prefer Lucas. It doesn't turn into what they call stickation, which is when lube starts getting kind of sticky from getting old. Theirs never does it. It stays super free, and it's synthetic too, which is probably why it doesn't do it. But I get the most mileage out of them. I literally take these reels apart once, sometimes twice a year. I would do it right after one fell in the water. If I had one fall in the water, I definitely would do it. But yeah, it's good stuff. I swear by it, and I wouldn't use anything but Lucas reel oil inside these things. I do all my bearings and any plastic parts with metal parts or two plastic parts that rub together, Lucas reel oil, period. Okay, now the worm gear that's inside here that your guide runs back and forth on is usually blocked. It's got a big flathead screwdriver. You can see you can get to the flathead screw, but you can tell there's no distance there. There's absolutely no distance there to be able to get that thing out. You're not going to get that thing out of there with the face guard on. A lot of companies like KastKing and is one of them that puts these really cool looking face guards on. Makes the reels just look cool as heck, but it's in the way when you go to tear the reel apart. Super simple. Usually they've got one, sometimes two screws. KastKing uses both. This model happens to have two. There's a screw on this side and this side. Just right there and right there. So we're going to take those two screws off so we can get that really neat looking faceplate off. Okay. And that faceplate ain't just for looks. I mean, your guide's sitting out there. The older reels used to have those guides just sitting right out there, and you plop it down hard on the ground or anything, and hit something. You take a chance at busting that, because see, with that out, you can see that from that side view, there's your reel guide. There's your screw that holds the worm gear drive in, the button that actually locks into the worm gear to allow the guide to move. So as you can tell, there's a lot of exposure there. You don't, that top view, you can really see. So it's more than just looks, even though KastKing makes them look really cool, especially the Mega Jaws with the teeth on it, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so now's where you're going to switch to your big screwdriver tip, because These things are plastic, these caps. These little caps that hold the drive shaft in that goes into the worm gear. Those are plastic. Now these threads are going to be standard threads, so you're just going to unscrew them righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So you're going to unscrew that. Now be careful when you unscrew this. KastKing, to this day, I have not seen a KastKing that uses a little brass piece that goes inside of there, which I like. I'm glad they don't. They use a molded piece of plastic that's built into the cap, so you don't have another piece to lose. And frankly, that works perfect. There's no need for there to be that little brass piece that goes in there, because really it's plastic on plastic. The guide's plastic and the cap's plastic. You shouldn't be over tightening that in the first place. So there's no need to put all those extra parts in there that you're going to lose and have problems with, you know. So just tip that over and out will come the drive shaft that goes up into that worm gear. That is your little half moon thing that locks into the worm gear. Those little grooves in the worm gear. Those are your little grooves in your worm gear, and there's your little half moon piece that locks into that. Okay, so we just sit that down. Now the guide is free to move because there's nothing locking it in. That's what that thing does. That locks the worm gear in, that drive shaft, and only the worm gear can actually drive the guide, which is what you want. So we're going to take the Phillips screwdriver out of the small, and we are going to go to our standard head small screwdriver. Now I don't usually take them this far apart because really there's no need to, but I told you guys I'd show you how to do all this all the way down. As far as we've got it apart now, you can clean this thing. As far as the guide's concerned, we still have one more part to take off over on this side that you'd want to take out, but we're not going to worry about that yet. Okay. So on this side where the spool goes in, at least on KastKings, I don't know about other makes because everybody does stuff different, but on KastKing, the WhiteMax, there is a little C-clip right here. There's a little circlip, okay? Little locking circlip right there, okay? You take your screwdriver and you pop that little circlip off on the side where the spool goes in, okay? And you want to be careful with that because you want to go slow and easy with that because it will fling out on you and you'll lose it. So there's your little circlip. One of those little circlips that locks it. That's all they are. Just a little circlip thing like that locks that thing on. Okay. So now that you got that off, there's going to be a little brass washer there. Okay. Don't lose that washer. The reel will work without this washer, but that little washer right there, a little brass washer right there, is what sets the end play in that worm gear. So it'll be sloppy. So don't lose that.